Hola, Hispanic Patriots! Tonight, as they say, the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance.
Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Well, you heard him say it, folks. There they are. They are.
This election cycle and voting is already underway.
One of these men will be our
states.
vice president.
CBS News polling shows
and
this
we all
remains
know
a race
who we would
either
prefer
presidential candidate
in that choice.
The CBS News vice presidential debate starts
I'll
now.
give you a hint. It's the guy who looks like that, and not the guy who flips off his opponent's supporters. Not the guy who lies about his military rank. Not the guy that drank certain things at certain times. Really nice production values, though, here.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, America decides. The vice presidential
That wasn't
debate.
the smartest place to have this debate, honestly, was New York, given Trump's poll numbers in it.
And thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S.
We really appreciate the ratings, guys. You know they're in the toilet.
Our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance.
So we've got Waltzing Matilda and the Hillbilly Elegy going on here. Why does the girl on the right look like she's about to burst out laughing?
In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator.
Just in case you've never seen a presidential debate before, I guess.
To facilitate the debate between the candidates.
And to fact-check the Republican and no one else.
Opportunity to fact-check claims
See,
made by
there you
each
go.
other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum.
The media reserves the right to shut you up.
The campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora.
The one that could actually see
Iran
nukes
launched
flying,
its
I guess.
largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks
Pretty
to
spectacularly,
joint US
to
and
be
Israeli
honest.
defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war.
But we're not at war
Iran is
anywhere,
weakened.
and troops are not
The US
stationed
still
anywhere in
considers it
any
the
war zone.
largest
Remember
state
that
sponsor of
from
terrorism in the
Kamala
world,
and
It
Biden?
has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
You got it,
Thank you
Toad Man.
for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend
Iran
itself is
or
absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian
There's
crisis
nothing worse
in
than screwing up
Gaza.
on the first question in a
But
debate.
the
I don't
expansion
think.
of
I
Israel
think.
and its proxies
I
is
think
an
Walz has
absolute
already lost his
fundamental,
footing.
Necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is
As
not what we
opposed
need
to the
in this
80-year-old
moment.
guy that
But
we
it's
were
not
trying
just
to
that.
elect
It's those that
before
were
we took
closest to
over.
Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of
Trump
staff,
is
John
dangerous
Kelly,
for the world. That's
said
why
that
we
he was the
had
most
no
flawed
new
human being
wars
we've ever
under
met.
him.
And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person
Again, the people he
closest to them,
fired.
Donald Trump said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen.
Maybe don't tee that up for Vance to say, I was wrong, and so are you.
We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see
allies'
Trump
lives matter,
turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together,
but we'll shoot down Iranian rockets hitting to Israel, but not Russian rockets hitting to Ukraine.
And our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Because Tim and Kamala and Joe are consistent.
Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by
JD,
Israel
first shot
on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are.
That is smart.
I was raised
that
in a
is
working
incredibly
class family.
smart right
My mother
there.
required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my mother.
Kamala, I was raised upper middle class. JD.
I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president. With
Tim Walz is really upset that he didn't
for the
do
American
this.
dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies.
Or selling to Russia.
Launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator.
I love how he
Governor
circled
Walz,
that
do you
back
care
and
to respond
actually
to
really
any of the
decisively
allegations?
answered the
Look,
question.
Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance.
We agree. Yes, Donald Trump
pulled
did
that
do
program
that.
and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon
Whatever
than it was
that
before
means.
because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And
Tim
when
Walz,
Iran shot
Trump
down
helped
an American
Iran get the
aircraft
nuke.
in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald
You know, if
Trump.
Obama had just
And when
tweeted
Iranian
in 2009 when
did fall
Iran was
near
revolting,
US
maybe we
troops,
wouldn't even be
and
dealing
they
with this
received traumatic
problem.
brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald
That's a
Trump
common
is fickle.
soldier's
He
joke.
will go
That
to whoever
proves
has the
Tim
most flattery
is
or
not a
what makes sense to
military
him.
man.
Steady leadership like you witnessed today.
If
like
you get
witnessed
half
in
your head
April.
blown off
Both
and you say to
Iranian
your buddy,
attacks
it's
were
just a
repelled.
headache,
Our
you're
coalition is strong,
a
and
hero.
We need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal
the
with Iran to temporarily
stable
pause
relationship
parts of
that
its nuclear
Kamala has
program,
with
and
China
President
and
Trump
Russia and
did
everybody
exit
else.
that deal.
Who's begging
He
for her
recently
election.
said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did
JD
Iran
is being
and Hamas
extremely
and their proxies
magnanimous,
attack Israel?
and
it was during the administration of
that's
Kamala
gonna break
Harris.
Walz.
So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American
JD's
president
had a
didn't
birthday
have a
since
major
then. How about
conflict break
that?
out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
I really
Thank
do
you.
think you'll see
Let's turn
JD.
now to Hurricane Helene.
Like John
The
Coffey
storm
said in The
could
Green
become
Mile, you
one
kill
of
'em
the
with love,
deadliest
boss.
on
You
record.
kill 'em with love.
More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more
Metaphorically,
are
of course, obviously.
Scientists
Nobody
say
is going
climate
to be in any
change makes
danger.
these
This debate is probably the safest
hurricanes
place
larger,
in New York right
stronger,
now.
and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator,
Hurricanes
what
are caused by cow
would the Trump
farts. That's
administration
sort of
have
the
to try
general
and
idea
reduce
here.
the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive
prayers
as a federal
for
response as
those
we can
who have
get
lost
to
loved
save
ones.
as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards.
On a practical
to
note
help
for the
people in
debate,
those
Tim
communities
Walz
rebuild.
having
And
to
these are
follow
communities that I love. Some of
JD's
them I know very
lead.
personally in Appalachia,
Really
all across
impressive.
the Southeast. They need their government
Bring
to
it
do
back
their
home.
job.
That's
and
what
I
he's doing.
commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions. This idea
The
that
way
carbon
Tim's
emissions
writing,
drives
I
all the
wonder if
climate
he's
change.
writing in cursive.
Well, let's just say that's true. Just for the sake of
Curious
argument, so
little
we're
note.
not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much
Other
energy
manufacturing
as possible in the United
sectors
States
are
of
so
America
much dirtier
because
than
we're the
ours. It's so
cleanest
true.
economy in
I
the
also
entire
like that
world.
JD said
What
the
have
word
Kamala
weird
Harris's
just at
policies
any
actually led
point,
to?
just to
More
take that
energy
word
production in
kind of
China,
out of Tim
more
Walz's
manufacturing overseas, more
dictionary
doing
there.
business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per
That
unit
was
of
good.
economic
He
output.
saw
So
that
if we
saying the
actually
dirty
care
part of the
about
world
getting
would be
cleaner
used
air and
against
cleaner
him
water,
and corrected
the best
it.
thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
I forgot
We're
he
not
was
close
even
to an
here.
agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as
JD did so much of a
co-chair of
better
the Council
job.
of Governors. We work together on these
at that
emergency managements.
empathy.
Governors know no partisanship. They work together to all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared on.
Enough about them
faster and
people. Let's
stronger
talk about
than
the
anything we've
climate
seen.
change.
Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able
JD
to
should just
invest in.
say, you're debating
What
me,
we've seen
not my
out of the
running mate,
Harris,
and just pull a Kamala
administration
there.
Now, the Biden-Harris administration is, we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville.
All those
Ohio.
jobs we
Taking
created
the
that we
EV
destroyed
technology
back
that we
during
invented
COVID.
and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing
200,000
plant
jobs
in
is
North
nothing
America
for what
sits
it's worth
Minnesota.
in a country
But
of
my
300
farmers know
plus
climate
million
change is
people.
real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to
Especially
back.
when those
But what they're
jobs are
doing is
usually
adapting,
going
and
to
this has allowed
friends
them
of
to tell
people
me,
the Democrats
look, I
know.
harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also
You
producing
don't
more
harvest
clean
wind,
energy.
you harness
So the,
wind.
The
Tim.
solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely
It's real,
critical,
man.
but this is
It's
not a false
absolutely
choice.
real.
You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs.
Not
that we're
saying
seeing
that
all
the
across
climate
the
doesn't
country.
change,
That's exactly
but
what this administration has done.
leftists
We are
really got to
seeing
stop
us
with the
becoming
cult
an energy
stuff
superpower
about
for the
it, because
future,
it just makes
not just the
environmentalism
current. And that's
cringy.
what absolutely makes
And that's a
sense.
crime.
And then we
Making
start
the
thinking
environment
about
good,
how do we mitigate
being cringy,
these disasters?
Thank
That
you.
is a
Senator,
disaster,
I want to give you an
Tim.
opportunity to respond there. The governor
I know so
mentioned
many
that
people that
President
don't
Trump has
recycle
called
just
climate
as a
change
knee-jerk
hoax.
reaction
Do you
against
agree?
this sort of thing.
Well,
Like,
look, what the president has said
All right.
is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially
dang,
the
that
go into
was
those
a
solar panels.
catch
So if you
and
really
throwing
want to
right
make
back.
the environment cleaner,
Dang.
you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
It's
Natural
true.
gas, we got to
It's
invest
true.
more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by
your
the
time
climate.
is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and
We're
like
not
I said
producing
again,
more oil.
These are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that,
I'm fairly
we're thinking
certain our
ahead
number
on
one
this. And what
export
Kamala
isn't
Harris has been
dirt,
able
Tim.
to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was
Starting
passed
to
allows us to think
some of
about
these
mitigation in the
things.
future.
How
do we
confidence
make sure that we're
inspiring.
protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's
Didn't
climate
really
is warming
answer
at an
JD's
unprecedented
point.
rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration.
Interesting little
The
sprinkle
crisis
right
at the
there.
U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil?
Are you gonna give us
You have
fodder
2
to
minutes.
call you kids
So
in
first of all,
cages,
Margaret,
guy?
Before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot
New
of fentanyl is
word
coming into
and
our
phrase
country.
for
I had a mother
Republicans.
who struggled with opioid addiction and has
Asylum
gotten clean.
fraud.
I don't want people who
Blessings
are struggling with
to
addiction
his mother,
to be
by the way. The
deprived of their
opioid
second
crisis
chance
is
because
a
Kamala
horrible
Harris
thing.
let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the
When
bleeding.
our own
You've gotta
Democrat
re-implement
leadership
Donald
is the
Trump's
biggest
border
reason we're
policies,
suffering from
build
this
the wall,
neo-opium war by
re-implement
China,
deportations,
it's
and
time
that
for
gets me to your point,
Republicans.
Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 20, 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed
Put them
some
into
form of
tiers,
crime
get rid
in
of them
addition
within
to
those
crossing the border
tiers.
illegally.
Genius.
I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you asked ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at
We
homes
need to
with their
pray that
families.
they're found,
Some of them
people.
have
We
been
need
used
to.
as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation
Most of
policy
them
in
are
this
Hispanic
country
children,
is
by the way.
unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember, when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
If politicians could admit
Governor,
mistakes and adopt the
do you care
platforms
to
that are
respond to any
successful
the
of their
specific
opponents, we would be in such better
allegations,
position
including
as a
that the vice
country.
president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things? Regarding
Oh, I wish I had an
Fentanyl is
earpiece
not
right
true, but I
now.
will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history.
Yeah, because most
30%
of them are
decrease
already
in Ohio,
dead, you
but there's
jerk.
Still more work to do. But let's go back to this.
I'm
on
sorry.
immigration.
Usually
Kamala
you
Harris
folks
was the
know that I'm
Attorney
not
General
quite
of
as
the largest
vitriolic
state,
as that, but I have
border
a
state
very
in California.
personal
She's the only
connection,
person in this
series
race
of personal
who
connections
prosecuted
to the
transnational
opioid
gangs
crisis.
for human
So.
trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United
Maybe
States
me,
Congress.
most of
That's
us.
the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration.
Are they
that
ever
this
going
nation
to
seen. It was
ignore this
crafted by
bill? Are they ever going to
conservative
let this
senator
go?
from
No.
Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents. Detection for drugs.
I love how half of that
DOJ
support
money
was
to
the
speed
media
up
we control
these,
said it was a good idea.
adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it.
I
gives
wish
them
the
a
Democrats would
campaign
say
engine.
what was actually
It gives them
inside
the-
of this
what
bill.
would Donald
Again,
Trump talk about if we actually
big
did
Ukraine
some of these
supporter
things?
here.
And they need
You
to be
don't
done
put Ukraine
by the
aid
legislation.
into the
You can't
border
just
bill.
Do this through the executive
They never
branch.
mentioned that.
So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this, and he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are
2%
again,
if you
9
count the
years after we
entirety
came
of the
down that
border.
escalator,
If you
dehumanizing
subtract the Rio
people
Grande
and
from
telling them what
that,
he was going to do.
that percentage
As far
goes
as
a
the
lot higher.
deportation
Yeah.
plan, At one point,
Good job,
Senator
JD.
Vance
Just-
said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill. She'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator,
And that bill
question
will
was,
magically
you
help the
separate
immigration?
parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't
Brilliant
accuse Kamala
response.
Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country, and we know that they use children as drug mules. And it
Oh,
is a
did you guys
disgrace,
see that?
and
Tim
it
literally
has to
go,
stop.
yeah,
But I think what
yeah,
Tim
sounds
said
fair.
just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that.
Calling
We had
it a
record number of
medieval
illegal
vanity
crossings. We had a
project to
record
protect
number of
our
fentanyl
border.
coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94
Right.
Donald Trump
You can talk
executive
about the
action
bill
that
forever
opened
until the
border.
cows come
This
home.
problem
The
is leading
actions
to
she took
massive problems in the
outside
United
of
States
legislation
America. Parents
have
who
been
can't afford
terrible.
healthcare, schools that are overwhelmed.
And it's a
got
primary
to stop, and it
executive.
will
It's
when Donald Trump
primarily
is president.
executive
Senator, your
responsibility
time
on
is
top
up.
of it.
Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority
What about our
of
polling?
Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue
Look,
with a
Fat.
bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this.
When you don't want to
talking
solve
about
something,
saying, "I
you
will create
demonize
stories
it.
to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said it's not true. Don't
It
do
wasn't disparaging the
There's
Haitians of
consequences for this.
Springfield,
There's
only the
consequences. We
ones
could
that
come
were
together.
eating cats and
Senator
dogs.
Langford
The
did
ones
it.
that
We could come
weren't
together and
were totally
solve this
fine.
if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I
He
believe
didn't
Senator
need
Vance
to.
wants
He
solve
wanted
this,
to make
but
a
by standing
spectacle.
with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker,
I don't
you know
like
that
the
Congress
moderators,
controls the
honestly.
purse
Like, I
strings
kind of
and
thought
any
that maybe they
funding.
could be decent.
So you
but
have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive
you
action,
know, they know that Walz
solve
is
this.
off
Do you
step, so they're trying to
disagree
put JD off step.
that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans.
Millennials, you wonder why you can't buy a house? It's
most
possibly
worried about in
because
Springfield,
you're
Ohio,
competing
are the
with
American
25 million
citizens
people
who have had
who
their
should not
lives
even be
destroyed by
here.
Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is
That
up.
is
Governor, you have
interesting
1
to
minute
separate the
respond.
two like that.
It is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped.
I wonder
craft
how
it.
much
They're
you'll
the ones
actually
that
see
supported
Tim
it.
defend Kamala
That's
here. It
because
hasn't
they
been
know
too
we need
much.
to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less
That is a
affordable.
fair point
But it
that Tim
becomes
brings
a
up,
blame.
actually.
Look, this bill also gives the money
But both
necessary
are bad.
to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done.
Also, who
This
do you
bill gets it
think
done in
rents
90
those
days.
corporate
Then you
buildings?
start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what
That
we know,
corporate
American
housing?
principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about to the least amongst us you do
I don't
unto me.
mention that
I
I'm a
think
Christian
that's
very much.
true
Not
of
helpful
most
as a Democrat.
Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us.
If you
keep our
pass the
dignity
bill,
about
everything
how
will
we
be
treat other
fine. You
people.
imagine if they did pass
Thank
the
you,
bill,
Governor.
what would
And
their
just to
talking point be
clarify
on this?
For our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected
Well,
status.
Margaret,
Nora?
but
Thank you.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret,
Thank you,
I think it's
Nora.
important
We're
because
gonna turn now to the
debate-
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys weren't
economy,
going to
we're-
fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on
JD
as an
just
illegal
took over
migrant,
that
apply
thing.
for asylum or apply for parole and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of
Oh
illegal
man, they are
immigration,
realizing what a
Margaret,
mistake
Thank you,
they
Senator,
made
for
by allowing him to
describing
talk
the legal
now.
process.
Those laws-
We have
Kamala
so much
Harris
to get
opened
to.
up-
Tim's
Senator.
trying.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much-
the books since 1990.
Interesting.
Gentlemen.
As soon as he
wanna have-
talks, they
has
stop
not been on the
talking.
books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created.
They cut the mic. He's
Gentlemen,
still
you're-
talking. Dang.
The audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Thank you, Margaret.
These two are the epitome of
economy
I
is a
look
top
nice, but I am
concern for
absolutely
voters.
not.
Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of
In
you
case
out there
y'all
listening
haven't
tonight,
heard
you're
it
hearing a lot
enough.
of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house.
Because it worked so well in 2008. Kamala promises Obama's recession 2.0.
That the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis. Prices went down on rent 4%. It's working.
4% of $1,800
child tax credit. We have one in Minnesota.
Is about
reduces,
maybe
child poverty
100,
by
maybe
a third.
one. I'll
We
do some
save
math
money
on
in the
that.
long
You
run,
guys can do
and we
that.
the right thing for
What a
families.
ridiculous
and
statement.
Then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly
4% of $2,000 rent is $80. Oh, thank you, Tim, for the $80. Trump is the only man for the rich, clearly.
A 20% consumption or sales tax on
also, that's an average. That means that when housing prices went up, that still affected that statistic. I'm sorry.
Inflation and potentially lead to a recession.
But that was ridiculous.
Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do
like
that,
we always
our
do,
system
but
works
never
best.
get to be able
More
to.
People are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by
I'm so sick of this
trillion.
point.
My question is the
all
same
of these
for you.
institutes who
How do you
did these
pay for all
economic
that
plan
without
comparisons,
ballooning the
yes, they
deficit?
thought that
I'll give you 2
Kamala's
minutes.
was
Well,
better
first
than
of
Trump's
all,
by
you
like
hear a lot from Tim Walz
1%.
this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what
They
Kamala
both
Harris
basically said the
proposes
economy's
do,
going to stay the
and
same
some of it,
regardless.
I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American
if the
southern border
Democrats
and
just
make
picked literally
middle-class
anyone
life
who wasn't
unaffordable
also
for a
the
large
vice
number of
president,
Americans. If Kamala
the
Harris has
Republicans
such
wouldn't be
great
able to
plans
have this
for
line
how
of
to
attack,
address
folks.
middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago.
There it
and
is.
The fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies
How can you when you're in ivory towers your whole
in a
life?
generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were
Thank you for
already before
admitting
COVID
that,
in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression.
Democrat
9 million jobs.
COVID lockdown happens.
Whether it was
President
the Infrastructure
fault.
Act or other things we moved. Now,
It's a
you
logic
made
only a
question
child
about
could follow.
experts said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look,
Yeah,
if you're
the
going to be
system can't be
president,
trusted,
you don't
Tim.
have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this.
If you
And
need
I ask
open
you
heart
out there,
surgery, don't
teachers,
trust
nurses,
the
truck
shady
drivers, whatever,
Russian back
how is it
deal
fair that
doctor
you're paying your taxes
is
every
what
year,
we're
and
saying.
Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years. in the last year as president. That's
well,
what's
it's
wrong
hard to
with the
pay
system.
tax when you don't
There's a
take
way
over the
around it,
presidential
and he's
salary at
bragged
all.
about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea
That's
that if we made
JD's
America
main
less
point. I'm
self-reliant,
glad he
less
nailed it. It's the system that is the
nation,
problem.
it would somehow make us better off. And they were
Experts who
wrong about
support
it.
the
And for
system
first
cannot
time in
be
a
trusted.
generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to
Competing
say that
forces
bipartisan
need to be
consensus,
listened
we're not
to.
doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And
true.
we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald
we're
Trump
not
governed on.
ruled by
Senator,
experts.
Governor
We're
Walz,
ruled
can you
by the
address that? I mean,
people.
voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
If you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union
Kinda
guy
desperate.
on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home.
JD's
the issue is Donald Trump is
sort
talking
of
about
like,
it. Kamala
oh
Harris
yeah,
has a
right.
record, 250,000
Face
more
is such a
manufacturing
good
jobs
idea.
just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a
show
gross
that he
generalization.
did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and
It's not gross at all.
Tim,
It's a wonderful generalization.
Because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask
God
you
help
about your
us.
leadership qualities. Governor Walz,
Given our last
you said you were
3
in
vice
Hong Kong
presidents.
during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Can you explain why you're
folks
lying,
out there
Tim?
didn't get at the top of this. Look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National
Proud
Guard
of the
17,
service
worked on
of
family farms, and then I used
biking
the GI
with
Bill
your bros?
to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher.
What an interesting response to why did you lie, is to just
travel
start
through China.
rattling off
35
about
years ago
yourself.
to be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China.
What a
The issue
creepy
for that
way of
was
saying
to try
that.
and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was
They
at.
know I traffic kids to China.
I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can.
Yeah,
but
look
I'm
at
not
that
perfect,
question.
and I'm a
Is that
knucklehead
question
at times,
been
but it's
asked,
always been about that.
answered
Those
at
same
all
people
here?
Elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got
What
done,
is this?
working on
I've
veterans
never seen a
benefits.
politician
And then the people of Minnesota
iceberg through
were
a
able to
question
elect me
that
to
they
governor
couldn't
twice.
possibly answer
So look,
like this.
my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand
So we
the
shouldn't
world.
rag
It's
on
about
Xi
trying
Jinping
to
about
do the
COVID?
best you
What
can
is
for your
this?
community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was
I
being
was
a good
good at
soldier,
teaching.
or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things
I was
that I
good
think
at
are the values that
everything.
people care about.
Got some
Governor, just to
Lukashenko
follow up
energy
on
going
that,
on.
The question was, can you explain the
No,
discrepancy?
all I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and
Keep
China
going.
during the democracy protests, went in. And from that, I learned a lot of
So he's
what needs to
admitting
be
he's
in
lying,
governance.
but not directly saying, yes, I was wrong.
Thank you, Governor. Senator
I
Vance,
hate it when
in
people have this
2016, you called your
personal
running mate, Donald
pain
Trump,
in admitting
unfit
what they
for
did
the nation's
wrong.
highest office, and you
The
said
longer
he
you
could be
let that
America's
build
Hitler.
up, the bigger
I know you said
that's
you've
going
been
to be
asked
your
many
life,
times, and you've
and
said
you'll
you
never
regret
be
those
able to
comments
apologize for
and explained you then
anything,
voted for Donald
make up
Trump
for
in
anything you did
2020.
wrong,
But the Washington Post reported new
bring
messages
diplomacy
last week in
around
which
you, et cetera,
also
et cetera.
disparaged Trump's economic record while
You
he
got to
was
do that, and
president.
Democrats
Writing
literally
this summer in
never do
2020,
that.
Quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate.
JD
and you've
has looked
shifted
so
many of your
confident this
policy
entire
stances to align
time.
with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open, and sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the
I've
president.
called him
but I've
Hitler
also been
before. Of
extremely
course I'm gonna
open
tell him
about the
things he
fact
doesn't
that I
wanna
was
hear.
wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believe
That's
some
amazing.
of the media stories
Tim
that
could
turned
not
out to be
admit
dishonest fabrications of his record.
that he was wrong.
But most
JD
importantly,
does
Donald Trump
immediately.
delivered for the American people.
That is Democrat
Rising
versus
wages,
Republican.
Rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum
That's
to govern.
usually what
So
it
there
has
were a
been
lot
for the
of
last
things on
30
the
years,
border,
honestly,
on
more.
tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when
I was about to say, I wonder why the camera was on JD when they asked the question to Tim, but I guess CBS is kind of half asleep here.
In the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us,
based on a
send it to the
lie.
states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right.
It's true.
In this. So in Minnesota, what we did.
So he could agree, but it's been interesting how Tim has been accidentally, linguistically agreeing with
their health care. But
JD.
Look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025.
What an odd thing to say. If you don't know people who have been
make it more difficult,
raped and need an abortion, you absolutely will under us.
And limit access,
or under them, or what?
Access to infertility treatments.
Demagoguery, honestly, of the highest order.
Or why have a child. That's nobody else's business. But those things are being proposed. And
it's no one else's business if you kill a child. Yes, it is. The same way that it's our business if you rape a child, kill a child, traffic a child. It's interesting how Tim Walz believes that children are our responsibility when we're trying to save them from human trafficking, but not when they're being murdered by doctors and parents.
This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in
I don't get it. Do you folks get it?
We trust women.
So a stepfather who rapes and impregnates his daughter, he should go to jail or be executed. I think everyone would agree with that. I don't think everyone agrees that the baby should be executed.
Because I know a lot of Americans
that is the main point.
I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever
Which,
said.
by the way, I
topic.
believe in exceptions. I believe that for rape, incest, other things like that, under certain circumstances for incest, all circumstances for rape, etc., the basic Republican platform.
Didn't have any other options. And the
Democrats know that this is what the
me.
majority of
and I know she's watching
our
tonight,
opinion.
and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's
Tim apparently, nope, babies need to die everywhere.
Let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care.
I'm not exactly sure if a 5-hour, 6-hour drive is long unless you're
back and forth. The fact of the
was your
matter is,
abortion clinic by the Virginia border and you're from Savannah?
And your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography. there's a very real chance.
So
that Amber
Tim is
Thurman
making the
lived in
point. We want
Minnesota,
babies dead
she would be
across the
alive
country,
today.
regardless if you
That's
don't
why
want it
the
or not.
restoration of Roe versus
That's
Wade.
evil.
When you listen
I don't
to
know
Vice
what else to
President
call
Harris
it.
talk about this subject, and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out.
You see his
how to
little
get the
little
political
goblin
right of
ears
this.
growing
I
right
agree
now,
with a lot of what Senator
talking
Vance
about killing
said
babies.
what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is,
Facts.
why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in
The
the
radical
state of Ohio,
pro-abortion
we had a
stance of
referendum
having an
in
abortion
2023,
ban
and the
at your
people of
DNC.
Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom.
We're pro-women
to make your own
having
choice.
abortions.
We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too.
It's
we know
cold
that the
in
options need
Minnesota.
to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're
To have an abortion. This is like the states' right. State right to do what? I mean, that's a typical Democrat talking point on the Confederacy, but apparently not on abortion.
Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe
especially aborted
you're
babies.
You're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me. But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion,
he's already
where the baby
shaking his
survives,
head.
The doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric, and that's why I use that
It just
word.
keeps
Nora, is
rolling
because
through.
some of what we've seen. Do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big
JD,
and diverse
good
country
Catholic
where we respect
boy.
people's freedom of conscience and make
Tim's
the
like, I
country
can't
more
look at this guy
pro-baby and
anymore.
pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians.
So
who
nothing
know
about the
best when
Catholic
they
nuns
need to
you're
do this.
suing, huh, Tim?
Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point. That's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me. What was I wrong
about? That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given.
But he can't explain how. I love what JD is
that
doing
getting
right
involved,
now.
That's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women.
JD's
or to
like,
get involved.
he's trying to get out of
I use
it.
this line on this. Just
I
mind your own
love the
business
way
on
JD
this.
debates.
Things
I have
worked
never
best
seen
when
him
Roe
do
versus
so.
Wade was in
It's
place.
brilliant.
When we do a
Brilliant
restoration of
modern
Roe,
debate
that works best.
tactics.
That doesn't preclude us.
I love it.
From increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us.
Reminds me
from
of the
making
way
sure
I
that
argue,
once that
minus the
child's
Ivy
born,
League
like in
education,
Minnesota,
adding
they
in
get meals. They
street
get early
education in
childhood
Chicago.
education.
Let's just
They
call
get
that.
health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing.
I almost said a
them.
Polish
She's proposing
education.
all
Shout
those
out to
things
my
make
Polish
life
bros out
easier
there.
for families.
I asked a specific question,
And
Governor,
ladies,
you gave
of
me a
course.
slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not
Let's
true.
see
That's not
this
what the law says. So they fact-checked it
So
with
what does
President
it?
Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss.
Tim's just looking like, can you help me, guys?
With much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
All right, round one is over. I like JD trying to talk to them.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 40.
I don't know if all y'all heard gunshots instead of the gavel right there,
Since
but
1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of
all
government.
right, we can skip through the little C-SPAN ad right here up to a certain point and have a couple minutes, about 1 minute, to talk about the debate so far. JD's doing great. I think we could all see that Tim is really misstepping quite a lot. JD's argument style is fantastic, as I said previously just now. I think Tim is kind of trying to rely on the moderators, honestly. His arguments have been weak. His comebacks have been more or less non-existent. And JD has been kind of running the table with him, honestly. He's able to control his debate opponent. And that once you have that, you've won the debate. Once you have control of your opponent, you're able to literally get them to respond to you, say what you want them to say, follow your lead. It's very brilliant, honestly. I think JD is honestly a better debater than Donald Trump, just because he doesn't get distracted. And I think Donald Trump's distractions have a purpose, but I think you can see here what a clean, sleek debate performance can actually do. A lot of people thought JD was gonna bomb here, between multiple situations he's had when he seems a little antisocial, at least in uncomfortable situations. Whenever he's in a comfortable situation, or even with the spotlight on him in the media, he's very good. It's mostly everyday social situations that he's not necessarily the best presenting, and that's just the case of being a hard-scrabble kid who grew up in a rough life. All right, we're back to it. And you want that kind of guy running your country rather than the kind of guy Tim is.
Welcome back
Resume
to the CBS
fluffer,
News vice presidential
and,
debate.
I'm sorry, but I'm not
going
going to admit I was wrong.
America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms.
Again, children and
Senator
teens,
Vance,
those teens
you oppose
include
most gun
drug
legislation
dealers
that Democrats
and
claim would
criminals
curb gun
and
violence.
gang members.
You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation
And
to ban
suicides. You
certain
add those in
semi-automatic
together for
rifles,
teenagers. It's not
including
children. That
AR-15s.
teenagers and
So let me
children
ask you,
thing,
earlier this year,
ridiculous.
for the
Don't let
first time,
anybody do that
the
to you.
parents
Say which
of a school shooter were
or which
convicted
either
of
or.
involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Probably.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that
no
particular
joke.
case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff.
I kind of wish
and we
that
do have
JD,
to
that's
do
probably his
better.
only
And
minor
think that
mistake.
Governor
I
Walz
really
and I
wish
actually
he
probably
didn't
agree
make that
we need to do
point
better on this.
because
The question is just how do we
it sort of
actually do it?
justifies the question,
Now,
which is
here's
already a
something
bad
that really
basis.
bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better.
true.
We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And
Tim's
of course,
like,
we've got to
no, make it
increase
big and
resource
open. Make sure we
officers,
get a
because the
lot of
idea
nice
that
ratings
we can
for our
magically
Democrat
wave a
Party.
wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience.
You know,
We've
and
gotta make
I
our
really
schools
dislike
safer,
my
and I think
school
we've gotta
had
have some
security.
common sense, bipartisan
And we
solutions
love
for
the
how to do that.
security guards. They were
Governor,
some
you
of the
have
best friends
Well,
of
I
the
think all the parents
students.
watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and
Yes,
and
Tim,
he
we
witnessed
know
a
he
shooting
cried
at a
for you at the
community center
DNC.
playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress,
That was
sat
nice of JD to
in my
add that.
office, surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota,
So that's interesting.
enacted
We own guns.
enhanced
We're going to take away
red
your
flag
guns.
laws,
Very open.
enhanced background checks. And we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just look at it,
Psychologically
and
speaking,
here's
from
what I
a
do
research
think. This is a
perspective, the
good
media
start to the
does more to
conversation.
perpetuate
I
mass shootings than
100% believe
anything
that
else.
Senator Vance
People want the
hates it when these
recognition.
kids- it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that.
I've been
But
amazed by
that's
how
not
much
far
these
enough
two
when we know
guys
there are
have
things that
agreed with
work.
each other on
I've
various
spent time
things.
in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the
Finland
idea
also
to
has
have some of
basically
these
universal
weapons out
conscription,
there,
too.
it
So
just
when
doesn't
you're-
make any sense.
Gun
Kamala
handling
Harris,
is around
as an
drill
attorney general,
sergeants. You tend
worked
not
on this
to
issue. She knows that it's
do
there.
stupid
no
things.
one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all
Yes,
of you
you
out
are.
there,
You've said it
do
numerous
you want
times, or at least
schools
your
hardened
running
to
mate
look like a
has.
fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills? They're being kids.
No,
We owe
instead
it
they're
to them
practicing
to get a
military
fix. These are
drills,
things
like
that
in
shouldn't be that
Finland,
difficult. You
or
can still keep your
Estonia, or
firearms,
Latvia,
and we can
or
make a difference.
Lithuania.
We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's
appreciate
doing
you saying
okay.
so.
Christ have mercy. It is
That was
awful.
beautiful.
And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem
Taking over the
and
weird
Finland.
word is great.
Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health
To a
crisis
country
in this
that's right
country
next
that I
to
really do
Russia.
we
Think
need
about
to get
that.
to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to
I've
teach
become
gun
friends
safety.
with school
I'm of an
shooters.
age where
I'm sorry. Are we
shotgun
gonna? Are
was
we
in
just
my
gonna
car,
roll
so I could
past
take it
that
home
right
after football
now?
practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on
I'm
this.
friends with school shooters.
Talking
Hey
about
Tim,
cities
you're a
and where
good
it's at.
guy. Don't come to school
The number
tomorrow.
one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have
That
an
one's gonna
epidemic
be all
of
over the place,
children
isn't
getting
it?
guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent.
Exactly.
And I think what we end up doing
JD
is we
is saying
start
the same
looking for
thing.
a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the
No,
guns.
it's not.
And there are things
That-
that you can
I
do
have
about it.
never
But
seen
I
a
do
Democrat
think
say that.
this is
It's not
one-
the mental
and I think
health,
this
it's
is a
the
healthy
guns.
conversation. I think there's a capacity to
Humans
find solutions on
operate
this
guns.
that work, protect Second
I
Amendment.
guess
protect
if
our
they don't
children.
have a
That's our
gun,
priority.
then they're
Gentlemen,
completely
thank you,
harmless,
Margaret.
right, Tim?
Thank you, Nora. Let's
What an
turn now to the
absurd
top
thing to say.
contributor
What a
to
series of
inflation,
absurd things.
the
I
high
guess that's
cost
the
of
kind of
housing
information you
and
get when you
rent.
get it from school
There's
shooters.
a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices.
We're going to be talking
Governor
about
Walz,
that on the show.
The Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise
Gosh, thanks
to
for
build
10%,
3 million
guys.
new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
Yes,
No, it's
it
not
will.
handing out. We have.
Yes,
Let
it
me
is.
say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to.
I didn't know
it
Tim
more
was
affordable.
Catholic.
And one of the
Maybe
things, as I
that's
said,
interesting.
This program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota.
The
from
new
that
way of
lead.
approaching
We in the state
housing
invested in
subsidies,
making sure our
one of the
housing
oldest
was
things in
biggest
the
investment
book.
that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter
I don't think JD
is
was
that we
relying
don't
on
have enough
one
naturally
issue for housing at all.
Affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up.
For what it's worth,
Senator
Tim Walz
Vance,
is not Catholic.
as
He's
far as your
Lutheran,
campaign's
and those
position,
particular
the
Lutherans
promise
still
is
have
to
midnight
seize
mass.
federal
So.
lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan?
Well, we're
will
not
provide
going to.
immediate
Developers that aren't
relief?
BlackRock are
You
going
have
to
2
make them.
minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs.
That's Tim's don't lie
25 million
moment.
illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce
Don't
homes
lie.
is one of the
Remember,
most
folks, when
significant
Donald Trump
drivers
stole
of
Kamala's
home prices
thunder
in
there?
the country. It's why we have massive
JD's kind of stealing
increases in
Trump's
home
thunder,
prices
honestly, right
that
now.
have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing
Speaking
more
of
affordable,
throats,
I
once
invite
again,
her
here to
use
remind
the office
everybody,
that the American people already
Kamala
gave her,
Harris,
not sit
neither
around
black
and
nor
campaign and
Indian,
do nothing
Dougla,
while Americans find
which
the
means
American
two
dream of homeownership
throat,
completely
two neck,
unaffordable.
two tongues.
Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel than the lumber he's delivering
this
to
is
the
pretty
job
typical
site to build the
Republican
house is
economics
also
going
gonna
on here
become a lot
versus
more
let's not
expensive.
redo
If we open
Obama's
up American
2008
energy,
plan.
You will get immediate pricing release.
I wonder which the American people
for
will be
American
interested in
citizens,
following.
Not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer
Can I have it?
where? Governor, we will get to you in a moment, but Senator,
I'm sorry,
where are
that
you
was
gonna
kind
seize
of
the federal
a
lands? Can you clarify?
She thing to say,
What Donald Trump
honestly.
has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing.
New
And I do
cities
think that
on
we should be
federal land
opening
would
up
be
building in this
fantastic,
country.
honestly.
We have a lot of land that
That's
could
what
be
the
used. We
crown
have a lot
lands
Americans
of
that
the
need
monarchies
homes.
of
We should
old used to
kicking
be,
out
in
illegal
part, the
immigrants
kind
who are
of land
competing
you
for
could
those
give
homes,
to
and we
others
should
when
be
it's
building
needed.
more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Colorado
Senator,
has
your
quite a
time
lot
is
of
up.
federal land, actually. So
Governor, I really want
Colorado
you to
would
respond to
benefit
the
from a
allegation that the
Trump-Vance
Vice
presidency
President
in
is
terms of
letting in
federal land
Of course, that's
and
not true.
housing.
And
And that
again, you
it's
have the
affecting
facts. I
housing
guess we
prices.
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's again blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask though on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really
Anybody
important
who's
pieces of
been
land.
to
Now, Minnesota doesn't
northeastern
have a lot of
Denver
federal land.
area,
I know in the western
like
part of
where
the
we did our
country
first
do.
interviews on the
There's
show,
not
you
a
saw.
lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for
You
example.
do see
So
that.
the
You do
issue
see
is, I
gas
don't
and oil
understand the
wells, like,
federal lands
right
issue
next to
unless we see
farms
this,
and
I worry
houses
about
and
this as
stuff.
someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota.
Is Tim Walz pretending to be a Native American in stereotype here and believing not in land ownership? What is he saying?
Economists. Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is up. But
Sorry.
Senator, on that
Gosh,
point,
man,
I'd like
he
for you to
really does
clarify
not
there are many contributing
have much
factors
confidence at all.
to high housing
I really don't know
costs.
why
What
they're all
evidence do
kind
you
of
have
on this
that
one housing
migrants
point. I think it's because they know
are
it's the
part of
weakest.
this
I think that
problem?
somebody was
Well, there's a Federal
panicking
Reserve study that
in the
we're happy to
CBS
share
panic
after the debate.
room,
We'll put it up
saying,
on
no, no,
social
no, no, no,
media,
shut them up,
actually,
shut them
that
up.
really
They're-
drills down on
Everyone
the
remembers
connection between
2008.
increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also
We've been
the
through- we're almost
regulatory
circling that.
regime
It's
of
almost
Kamala
broken
Harris.
record ship over
Look,
here.
We are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a
least we
country
used
of
to be.
explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of
There it
people who
is.
have no legal right to
Which
be here.
includes
What
mostly
are the
rental
federal
properties
regulations?
as
I deal
well.
with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor.
Tim
and
is-
I don't
Tim is
necessarily
really
disagree with
not
that,
doing
that
well
in some
right
cases,
now.
Many of those are local. Many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things.
No
so
kidding.
which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for
No
those.
one's going to
Congress writes those.
deregulate the housing
Governor,
industry
thank
back
you.
to
Gentlemen,
like 1905.
We have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, I have concepts of a plan. Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that
Question,
would work?
when you have
And can you
concept
guarantee that
art,
Americans
did you
with
make art?
pre-existing
Yes or no?
conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got.
People want to say that
only
only the Democrats have shifted left. I do want to say the Republicans here did not used to always believe this. Insurance, I've heard it like this. Insurance, you cannot buy car insurance after you've crashed your car. That's why pre-existing conditions were never something that was covered previously. But now that we live, like RFK talks about, in such an unhealthy society,
when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of.
You need
prescription drugs fell in
coverage for
2018
pre-existing
for the first
conditions
time
because
in a very
as a
long
child
time.
you probably
Under Kamala
do.
Harris's leadership, prescription drugs
That's another
are up
reason
about
why Obama
7%.
wanted to keep kids
Under
on their
Donald Trump's
parents' health care
entire 4
plans
years,
and
they were
also
up
cover
about
pre-existing
1.5%.
conditions.
He
So,
introduced pricing transparency.
our
You think
need
about
for greater
healthcare, you go to a
healthcare is
hospital,
partially
you try
the
to buy
Democrats'
something,
fault.
and nobody knows
You
what it
know,
actually
mass
costs. That price transparency
industrial,
will actually give
agricultural
American consumers a little bit more
manipulation,
choice,
like
and
Tim
will
talked
also
about with
drive
the
down
topsoil
costs.
that
And we
his
talked
own
about,
party
you know,
supports and lets
the
foreign
reinsurance
corporations do.
regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that
Yeah,
if we allow
that's the
states
reason
to
you need more
experiment a little
healthcare.
bit on how to cover both the chronically ill,
I'd rather
but the
just them not
non-chronically
poison
ill,
us in the
it's
first
not just
place,
a plan.
please.
He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States, and I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was
It
doing
did. Yeah, it's funny.
disastrously
Trump
until Donald
did
Trump
salvage
came along.
Obamacare.
I think
That
it's
is
an important
facts.
point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's
Very
earned
true.
it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
True.
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was
But
so
we're handing it
important
off
is
to
I
a new
come from
generation, right,
major
guys?
Healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is,
Minnesota
under
being
Kamala
the most
Harris,
Scandinavian
more
state, but
people are
also
covered
being
than they
best
have
in
before.
healthcare.
Those of you
I wonder
listening,
if there's
this is
some
critical
genetic
to you.
component to
Now,
that,
Donald Trump
honestly.
all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to
Reminds me of a
repeal
joke.
Obamacare.
Danish
On
doctors,
day one,
Swedish
he tried to
nurses.
sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed
And
on
Finnish
to a
security
lawsuit
guards.
to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now,
Remember that guy we all called
years,
Hitler back in the
you
day,
lose
and we
your
called his running mate
pre-existing
Sarah Palin
conditions.
an
If you're
idiot?
sitting
Remember
home
that,
and you got
folks?
asthma,
That guy
too
was
bad.
right.
If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug
Are
prices for the
kids
first
really
time
children
with
anymore
Medicare.
when they're
We have
26?
10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones
I
that will
don't.
be there.
We,
But
there
look,
probably should be
this issue,
family plans
and when
like
Donald
that,
Trump
but
said,
there are.
I've got a concept of a plan. It cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a
JD
long
talked
time.
about how Trump
What
was
they're
saving
saying is,
Obamacare. Now
if
Tim's
you're
claiming that
healthy, why should
JD
you be
was
paying
opposing
more?
it.
So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your
This is
premium,
just a
it's not much.
fear-mongering
They'll
lie
figure
right
they're
here.
not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it.
What?
That's why the system didn't work.
Old
Kamala
Gray
Harris
got
will
cancer.
protect
Y'all
Indians,
know what I'm talking
the
about.
ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions.
We're
or
going
lay
to
out
keep
that plan.
Obamacare.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions.
Thank
we
you.
want to
There you
keep
go.
those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality,
Tim's like, yeah, it
Trump
will.
was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed.
How do you think Obama
absent his
feels that Donald
leadership?
Trump is
He
the one
did
that
his job,
salvaged
which is
his
govern in a
really
bipartisan
only
way and get
legislative
results,
success in
not
8
just
years?
complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And
Brilliant.
The question about this,
You're right.
again,
Donald
people,
Trump
whatever,
did do
that's
a
the
good job.
individual
I
mandate
agree.
piece of this. And
Let's
Republicans
go,
fought
Brandon. I
tooth and
agree.
nail, saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then
So
what
you
happens
think the
is
individual mandate's a good idea?
you shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to
Do
be
they?
there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people
If
say,
you
well,
get sick and
I
old
don't wanna
between the
buy into
abortions
Medicare or
and the
whatever. Good luck
fentanyl
finding
and the
healthcare
illegal
once you
immigrant
get past
murders
70.
and the
So
lack
look,
of
the
jobs
ACA works.
and
We can continue
the
to do better.
terrible
Kamala Harris did that. The way she
disaster
made everything
assistance.
better was negotiating
But if
those
you get
10 drugs
there,
on
we'll
Medicare
pay
the
for
first
your
time in
liver
American
treatment.
history.
Thank you, Margaret.
Because of all the poison that we allowed in the
apologize. We're out
agriculture.
of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America.
Yeah, let's talk about something else.
There
This
is
is
a
not going so well
childcare
for us.
crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal
fair.
is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies
Near
provide
Colorado,
paid family
shout
medical
out,
leave.
folks.
One is,
Woot, woot.
I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state.
So when
But the
you pay
negotiations on
to
it,
help
and
people
here's the
have
issue,
babies,
those big
they
companies
have
are able to
babies
offer it.
and don't abort
Those of
them,
you out there
Tim.
who don't
I
have
think
it,
I know why
just
you have
imagine
one
what
of the
happens
best
if you get cancer
fertility rates
or
or
your
whatever the
child
heck you
gets
were
sick.
saying,
Well,
huh?
you know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that.
We got Tim
This is
Orban
the
over
case
here,
of
you
an
know,
economy that
advocating
Donald Trump
for
has set
improving
for
the
wealthiest
lifeblood of
amongst
the
us.
nation.
He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say
The broken
bust
record
those
has come
unions up,
back.
do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works.
This is the
best
only time I've seen
when it works
JD
for
make
all of
notes.
us.
That's
And so
interesting.
a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask
20
them,
minutes
as
left of this,
far
so
as
he's gone an
child care
hour
on
and a
this,
half
you
almost
have
with no
to take
notes.
it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a
Bringing up the
policy
personal
perspective.
thing at the end of the debate, forcing Tim to lose time on that, because he's probably going to talk about his wife.
Cultural pressure
Brilliant.
on young families and
brilliant.
especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference.
Yeah, even Tim's
between
agreeing
Donald
with
Trump
this.
and Kamala Harris's approach.
It goes to show
Look,
Tim
if you look
actually
at the
really
federal
likes
programs
what
that we
JD
have to
says.
support
I
paid
think he
family
almost sees it
leave
as a
right now,
refinement
the
of what
community
Democrats
development
often
block
say,
grant,
where
and
they
there's
make
another block
mistakes
grant program
or
that
have
spends a
things
lot
that
of money
are
from the
not
federal
present
government.
that should be.
These
This is
programs
why left
only
and
go
right
to one
need
kind of child
to
care
come
model. Let's say
together.
you'd like your
If it
church
wasn't for the
maybe to help
Democrats,
you out with
we
child
probably
care.
would have
Maybe
been
you
so
live in a rural
already.
area or an urban area and you'd like to get
If your
together
goal as
with
a
families in your
politician is not to
neighborhood
end
provide childcare
politics,
in the way that makes the
what
most
are you
sense.
doing?
You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because
Love it.
look, it is unacceptable And, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot
better. And that's very true. I'm glad that he mentioned that, how we are the only country that really does that.
You also said, Senator Vance, many
allows
things about
it
the
should be
American
said.
family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts.
You have a choice as an American. Do you want babies?
Trump
do you want a house? Or do you want a
said,
career? Or do you want an education?
As much as child care is talked about,
You used to be able to get all four. Now you get to choose
speaking,
only one.
Not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers.
It's not a national
it's the heart
sales
of the Donald
tax.
Trump economic plan.
We simply
Cut
won't
taxes
buy
for
their
American
products
workers and American
anymore,
families.
and we will buy
Cut taxes for
domestic,
businesses that are hiring
cheaper,
and building companies
better
in the
American
United States of
stuff.
America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options.
Trump doesn't just promise things. He tells you how he's going to pay for them. Democrats haven't done that in 30 years.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people.
That's a brave thing for a Republican to say, and I'm
because the reason
totally
it's so
in
expensive
respect
right now
for it.
is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz.
Yep, we're going to give people better jobs, and part of that job is
proposals. Do you
exactly
think Congress
that.
will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is
very bad rendition of it, honestly, because we won't go into the specifics here. Maybe we'll get to it on the show, because that was an interesting little
child care, and they will lead with
mistake.
housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the
What
economy
does democracy
and
mean,
inflation.
people? Think about
After
that. The Pope
2020
is
election,
elected
President Trump's
democratically.
campaign and others filed 62
Hitler was elected
lawsuits
democratically.
contesting the results.
If the people
Judges,
who rule
including
want
those
a dictator,
appointed by
they
President
can vote
Trump
for
and
it.
other Republican
What does
presidents
democracy
looked at the
even
evidence
mean?
and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats,
Really tricky of them to
certified
save
the
this towards
2020
the end of the
election
debate.
results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance,
For
you have said
January
you would
6th.
not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal.
Well, it's not.
Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation
Brilliant.
crisis caused by Kamala Harris's
Brilliant
policies,
answer.
make housing affordable,
You did not
make
take the
groceries
bait.
affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration.
That's a good point.
I believe that we actually
if
do
January
have a
6th was
threat
such
to
a threat to democracy,
country,
why did Joe Biden
it's
still
not the
get
threat
able to
democracy
take
that Kamala
office?
Harris
You know,
and
surrounded
Tim
by a
Walz
literal
talk
army
about
corps.
is the threat
But,
of
you know,
censorship. It's
when you're elected by the
Americans
people, you
casting
need
aside
protection from the
lifelong
people who
friendships
elected you.
because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens, and it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition.
Nice name drops, again, right at the end.
On every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris
never
is
be scared of
engaged in
debate. Never shut
at an
people down.
industrial scale.
Ever.
She did it during
Unless
COVID.
they're being
She's done it
antisocial
over a
and
number of
crazy
other
and have nothing to
issues,
do with
and that,
debate.
to me,
That's
is a
different.
much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
JD took that question and just kamehameha'd it back.
Debate, and I think
Oh
there was
my
a lot
goodness.
of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator. But
me too, man.
There's one though that this
JD did not,
and
he
I
gave
say
it
that
to him
because I
anyways.
think we
That's
need to tell
great.
the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag. Several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In
It was
Minnesota,
one.
a group gathered on the state Capitol grounds.
Are you
in
gonna
St.
mention
Paul
Ashley
and
Babbitt,
said,
huh?
We're marching to the governor's residence, and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police.
How would you like that as Tim Walz's son to have the whole nation hear, oh yeah, he was carried out crying by state police?
Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with
I can
kids
see
long enough to know, and
little
I said,
Walz
as a
now.
football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork.
Yeah, like you guys are doing, have done.
Matter.
You guys saw
A
us
president's
interview
words
someone
matter.
who was
People
a
hear
political
that.
prisoner
So
of
I
this
think
man's running
this issue
mate.
of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American
How about we not
history
deny all the fraud that took place
a
before that
president
led
or
to the
anyone
anger of
tried to
January
overturn
6th?
A fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat.
It's also
I will
not.
tell
You
this,
guys tried to
that
overturn
when
it
this
in
is over,
2016
we need to
and
shake
2000
hands this
and
election, and
2000,
the winner
it
needs
should be
to
said.
the winner. This has got
Hanging
to stop.
Chads,
It's
Florida,
tearing the country
etc.
apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for
These two
years
had a
in this
nice
country,
chemistry, not gonna
Democrats
lie.
protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time.
I
And if
wouldn't
we
have
wanna say
mentioned
that
the
we need to respect
Facebook
the results
ads
of the
part,
election,
but it makes the
I'm
point
on
clear.
board.
It
But if
was
we wanna say,
ridiculous.
as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think of
No, it
revisionist
wasn't.
history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But
Well,
the
maybe if
issue
you
was
did,
that
you would
happened.
understand why
Donald Trump
Americans
can use it.
charged
And
the
all of us say
Capitol
there's
all
no place for
angry
this, but
about
it
what
has
you did.
Massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance, I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of
shockingly,
agreement.
yeah.
This is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election.
Because he didn't.
Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it.
I wish he had been
further,
mentioning the
but you
January
guys
6th
attack us
political
for
prisoners
not
in that
believing
particular
in
case
democracy.
rather
The
than
most
censorship.
sacred right under the
I
United
would rather
States
get censored
democracy
than thrown
is
in
the
jail.
First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants
Dangerous
to use
statement.
the power of government and big tech to silence people from
Big
speaking
thunk,
their mind.
big thinking
That is
right
a
here.
threat to democracy
You have a
that will
right to
long
hate
outlive
speech.
This present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both
Why?
reject
Because it's
censorship.
speech.
Let's persuade
You
one
are
another.
allowed to
Let's
hate
argue
people.
about ideas.
Should
and then
you?
let's
It's
come
not
together
Christian,
afterwards.
but you
can't
can.
yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire
By the
in
way,
a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the
masks.
governor does
That's
have the
not
floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere.
It is a
other
debate.
than
We're taking
Donald
that down
Trump
right now.
work.
Yes,
Because
it
look,
is.
When Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage.
Correct.
What I'm concerned about is where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's
Again,
what
he
we're
can't
asking you,
do that
America.
because
Will you
JD won't
stand
be
up?
the vice
Will you
president
keep your
until
oath of
January
office,
20th.
Even if the president
Kamala
doesn't?
Harris
And I
is the
think
only
Kamala
person
Harris
who
would
can
agree.
do what he
She
is
wouldn't have
referring
picked me
to,
if
and
didn't
she
think I
won't.
would do that. Because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice
No
on this
kidding,
election
Tim.
of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
I like how her facial expressions have gotten more expressive as the debate has gone on. She's like, oh, I'm so glad this is about to be over. So here we are, folks. End of the line here. We got the closing statements coming. And while I do think Tim had a little bit better of a delivery after the sort of first round, maybe he was coached a little bit, or that's a good question. Do they just have to stand there for like 15 minutes or whatever while things are being shuffled around? You're allowed to go to the bathroom. That'd be a little interesting behind the scenes. But on surface level, what we can see here is JD, again, continuously being able to take difficult questions, pitch them right back. Tim Walz, very much on the defensive, extremely on the defensive. But the main thing JD had is his ability to sort of reach over the aisle and say, you know what, we got some commonalities, you know? Kamala. But that's what I think a lot of American people will see, is that Donald Trump's running mate, the future of the Republican Party in general, has a lot of unity with left-leaning people. That is probably going to be the greatest outcome of this whole debate. And that's what JD, you know, it's interesting. A lot of people at the RNC were not happy with JD Vance's pick. Really were not, for several reasons. I also was really not happy about it at first. I'll admit that right here. But he's really proven himself. And I think this is, a matter of his studious work in understanding the future mindset of young Americans. We know that he has several ties with young, new right-thinking philosophers and other such people. And I think the situation that you'll see going forward is people who are interested in voting Republican this year but don't necessarily like Donald Trump can at least get behind J.D. Vance, the Republican Party as it is, and where it's going. I think so long as we find good leadership after Donald Trump, the Republican Party will be stronger post-Donald Trump. I do think Donald Trump is kind of a liability in several ways just because of so much hate that has been heaped upon him. It's difficult to carry that hot potato forever. So once that hot potato has to be dropped because of term limits, it becomes no longer something that burdens or limits us. And that's a lot. That's saying a lot, honestly, because Donald Trump is anything but a burden or a limitation. He's the one who got us here as the Republican Party. But outside of being in office, outside of being the leader of the country, of the free world, being the president, he can be a cultural liability. And as Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. Donald Trump is a brilliant statesman, brilliant cultural figure, but a divisive cultural figure. And that seeps into the politics. You all saw that by how the celebrities used to treat him and how they treat him now and have for the last several years. JD does not have that, and he's honestly a very nice person, but still ruthlessly decisive. And that's what we have to be as young Republicans. Kind, good-looking, well-mannered, stable, but also passionate, but also full of vigor, full of youth that people see and want to follow. Ruthless effectiveness. That is what young warriors have always been about, up here and in here. I think JD honestly does a really good job at showing how us young warriors can transition into being full and proper statesmen.
Presidential debate.
Back to the last.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. It is now time for the closing statements. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last.
I like how they have to mention it's a virtual coin toss. What we couldn't get.
Thank you, Senator.
Nobody
Vance.
has any coins in their wallets, or their wallets, I guess.
Thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters.
Is Dancing with the Stars even still on?
And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built. From Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift.
Don't mess that. I'm sorry, but do you really want to mention that Dick Cheney has your support?
They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our
he is. When he says he was friends with school shooters, I didn't know he was talking about Dick Cheney.
That better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just
the reason you think things are bad is because they could be better. No kidding, Tim.
Not the freedom.
These closing statements are really bad. I'm sorry,
but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us.
But the freedom of the government to be in your Facebook posts.
His first inaugural address talked about
throw you in jail for protesting at the people's house. You know,
4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand.
Still maintain American Carnage would have been a great movie title.
Down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be
an option that you did not vote for, but thank you.
That does resonate with me. He said Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid.
Tell him to stop being afraid. Yeah, you don't need to. You're being irrational.
Fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering
politics of joy. I mean, strength through joy, folks.
Asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive.
Democrats give you opportunity and then never actually give you any practical benefit. That's the problem. It's hard work for other people with no benefit.
I thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies.
I remember that kind of thing,
whether
too.
you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator
Oh, how
Vance,
pleasant.
thank you.
That's really nice. I don't
And
think
thank
it
you
was
both
honestly
for
a really
participating in the
great
only vice presidential debate of this election
closing,
cycle.
but it was nice.
I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just
I'm
35
Interfacer 1,
days
and I'm
until
Interfacer
Election
2.
Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
Well, and there it is, folks. And from Hispanic Patriot, thank you and good night. We have some nicety from Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. We have, I think these are the wives. The wives are coming out. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Instant kiss for J.D. and kind of a hug and something else for Tim. Just kind of a, ooh, you know, you did a bad job, honey. What the heck? So now the families are all talking and everything. We obviously can't hear it, of course. That's interesting. Did y'all kind of see how Tim Walz's wife really didn't want to interact with JD? We need to find some other things to talk about, right? Let's see what these guys are doing. Yeah, I've heard that a lot. That Tim Walz's wife is very similar to Jill Biden, in that she's just off-putting and mad, and she's like clearly wants him to just leave. And man, there was some interesting. I'm sorry, but I do think that matters. I think that matters enough to go back to. Look at the interaction. The two men are interacting just fine, and even J.D. Vance's wife, she's interacting just fine. She's being a great partner in this situation. But you see Tim Walz's wife, the shifty feet, the looking at the husband. Anybody who's been in social situations with older couples has seen this. The wife, okay, time to go, honey. I don't like these people. Very upper middle class type of attitude, and so you see that his expression getting different, and now okay, bye, you know, and they gonna have to put on a smile and everything. I would have liked to know what was going on there, because I basically think that Tim Walz's wife walked over there and just it's interesting. They don't even want to move forward. They're very, very antisocial, honestly, because of the wife. And now she's all happy, smiley. Now that the bad people are gone, you know. And she'll talk with them, but I'm sorry, folks. It's very important to look at the family of candidates and everything like that. So there it is, folks. The vice presidential debate. I think we all agree. JD absolutely crushed it, did a great job, completely upended all expectations. Tim Walz was shaky, said some very odd things, more odd than even Joe Biden. came across as weird, you might say. JD disarmed that so early on, was so kind to Tim. If we Republicans do this, if we don't have the Donald Trump sort of Queen's toughness, but we have more of that sharpness of the modern American youth, I think that, again, like I said, the Republican Party, huge upside, huge growth potential. You might as well join the Republicans because the Democrats are going down because you can't run a country for status quo for 200 years as the Democrats have since Jackson. Really, go through American history. It's been primarily Democrats who have run this country. Republicans often at the best and most beautiful times, whether it was winning the Civil War or building the American empire, whether it was under Calvin Coolidge, right before the Depression, one of the greatest economies we had, before effectively the outcome of Democrat-created central banking under Woodrow Wilson completely destroyed the basis of our wealth. This is all things that only Republicans can solve. And JD showed that without the usual roughness that a person of Donald Trump's generation would present. And even, Trump has often referred to himself as the last boomer. The last, I guess he and Hugo can both have that title. That they want the culture of the 60s that was built by the Democrats of rebellion and hatred of authority and so many things that have destroyed families and life. They want it to be gone forever. They're working to have what they were born into gone forever so that it no longer destroys the American people. That's what we young generation also need to strive and want to do. Again, as I said before, if you're a politician, your goal should be the end of politics, to bring people together in a way that goes beyond politics. And JD did that. Walz tried to follow the coattails of that, but really was not successful in doing so. Came across, especially at the end, I was worried at the end for Tim Walz's argument against J.D. Vance on the January 6th points. But J.D. just took him and threw him right back. It was a brilliant, brilliant debate on the part of J.D. Vance, and I think you're all going to see a bump in the polls. We're already seeing good numbers for Trump. I think those numbers are going to get better, courtesy of J.D. Vance, and courtesy of all of us here at Hispanic Patriot. Thank you all so, so much. And you won't want to miss tonight's episode. 6 p.m., folks, Mountain Time. You're going to want to save the date. We have an extremely special guest here, Greg Lopez, Congressman Greg Lopez, perhaps one of the most important Hispanic leaders in Colorado. You're not going to want to miss this interview tonight. You are not going to want to miss it. Wednesday, 6 p.m. at this YouTube channel, you will be able to see Hispanic Patriot interviewing Greg Lopez live, and I really hope you all enjoy that out there. This is a very important election for Hispanics. If we get out there and change our voting habits from Democrat to Republican, the news will be talking about us, how we helped win the election, how we helped do this. This could put us on the map, and we need to understand the gravity of that situation. So please join us as we talk about the vice presidential debate and Hispanic issues with Greg Lopez tonight at 6 p.m. We will see you all there, and we very much thank you for joining us for the vice presidential debate commentary. See you tonight, folks. Adios, and God bless America.